Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're super excited to be here again and to have you joining us today. Look forward to the discussion and the conversation and to your input most of all. So we'll be going through welcome and introductions. And actually, if you all wanted to, you could put your name and your affiliation in the chat, but just by way of introduction to the group. We'll be talking mostly about the collaborative today. I'll give a recap of kind of what that is, what we talked about in the first webinar, give some updates on what we've been up to since then. But then really the bulk of the time, we want to have a discussion with you all, a breakout group, to brainstorm together around systems change. And then we'll quickly reconvene at the end and wrap up. So in terms of a recap, the goals of the collaborative are threefold. First, to set a regional urban nature goal. Secondly, to provide tools and information that really link science to practice. And thirdly, to build on and learn from also each other's efforts. And quickly looking at these one by one. So the first solution, as a region, we have quite a few goals already, but there's a very conspicuous gap in our urban areas, and that's the gap that we're looking to close. For tools and information, we talked about this last time. We're kind of looking at this on two different scales. The first are the planning scale tools for planners and ecologists, people that are working kind of at the city scale or the watershed scale, but then also site scale tools for people that are working on their particular project, their particular parcel within this much larger urban fabric. And so those are more for communities and practitioners. And it's really when you bring both of these together that you have the greatest impact where they're building on one another. The third goal is collaboration. So there is this first slide here is around aligning for the regional goal. And there's various agencies and groups shown here that are all working on different reports and updates over the next several years. So hoping to collaborate across these groups, but then also more broadly across the region to learn from each other in a broader sense, also not just to work towards this goal, but to learn from each other's projects. And so on the municipal and county planning level, we can be learning from each other on like urban forestry plans, climate adaptation plans, and all of the items here shown in this list. Beyond that, there's also learning and adapting that happens, of course, also with these municipal and county partners, but with a bigger audience. And that's looking at cross-cutting partnerships that really support both the planning and the implementation and ultimately the funding of urban nature projects. Shared learning and training and resources through a regional hub that everyone has easy access to. Monitoring and maintenance metrics, and then the results of projects that then really help inform future projects. The sharing of best practices that are honed by these results. And then lastly, regional data and tool development that support collaborative and at the same time landscape scale planning. So we're hoping to have this collaboration really hit on a couple of different levels. We talked about this last time as well in our February webinar. The collaborative is really based on work groups, right? They're kind of the driving engine of this whole idea. And there are many, many different topics all related to urban nature. There's just a partial list here shown on the left. But ultimately, this is where we are looking to you all to join us and to help kind of round out and participate and bring your areas of expertise. We also talked about the benefits of a collaborative network. So aside from in the upper left, aligning around a regional goal that we would be creating together, there'd be regional data and tools, technical guidance, resources, training, also connections and information sharing, like I was just talking about in terms of being able to learn from one another and pulling lessons learned forward, templates and precedents, and also that web hub that I mentioned that has resources, hopefully also grant opportunities as kind of like a one-stop shopping idea. So that first webinar, you all really helped us think through these three categories of things. So work group topics, data and tool needs, and technical guidance, and what was resonating with you all the most in terms of rising to the top. And it's this first category, this work group topics, that we're today going to just dive a little bit deeper into. Also, I included this in our invitation email that went out, but also want to reiterate that the collaborative is still very much a nascent initiative. It has grown, there's momentum around it. So your continued participation in these webinars really is very helpful to us. It may seem not that tangible, but we really appreciate you all being here because it helps us build momentum. It helps us better understand the issues and be able to frame the collaborative in a way that will be most helpful to you all, to everyone. And it also lays the foundation for systems change conversation. So thank you for spending your lunch hour here. All right, so now by way of updates of what we've been doing since February. We initiated our first pilot work group, which we've been super lucky to be a part of with the Tipping Point Community Foundation. We launched in March, so right after our first webinar. And the outcomes that we are achieving through that are we established a public health work group that's focused on early childhood development, but it includes very cross-sector group of public health experts, so academics, physicians, et cetera, CBOs and NGOs, and also various municipal government entities. We are producing a literature review, and then ultimately, by the end of October, a report on the interconnectedness of climate change and the impacts of that on early childhood development, and then also how urban nature can help mitigate the negative impacts of climate change. So kind of coming back around in a little bit of a loop. We also just yesterday launched our website. Super excited about that. We will be, and I intentionally have not included the URL on this slide because we're going to be working out a few little gremlins over the next few days. But in the email that we send out, the follow-up email, we will include a URL. And I will also be following up with some of you who, over the many conversations over these last few months, have expressed interest in maybe endorsing the collaborative. So that would include your logo on the website. So we'll loop back on that. Also, feel free to reach out to me directly, as some of you have, which is fantastic. So more to follow on this. So now, systems change, which is really the topic of the webinar today and of the brainstorm session. So system factors, a system is a set of parts that work together to make a more complex whole. This little diagram on the right, pretty simple system. They can obviously become very complex. Systems change then is shifting the conditions that are holding a certain problem in place. So either one of the entities or one of the relational relationships between the entities, something isn't going quite right. So in this case, the problem that we have identified or want to kind of brainstorm around is that nature-based solutions aren't often prioritized as solutions, and urban nature is difficult to establish and maintain. So it's kind of a two-parter. And thinking kind of bigger picture around systems change, you really do need to understand both the history and the interrelationships between all the pieces. So you understand how the system came to be and how all the system pieces interact with one another before you start making changes that might have implications that you don't want. So systems can be very complex. The last slide, showed a very simple model. I don't expect you all to read this. It's basically a system map around children or child from age 0 to 8 and all of the different categories that affect that child. Things that are closer in are more of a direct impact to the child. Things that are further out are a little bit more indirect. The color coding also matters in terms of the different types of players that are involved in child's life. So systems are complicated. And again, going back to my earlier point, to understand it before suggesting changes or moving forward with changes is important. So there are 6 conditions that are needed to really fully, sort of like deep down implement systems change. And you'll see here there are 6 categories. They range from the dark blue at the top is structural change. The darkest blue are the most explicit items or sort of the most tangible. And then as you move down this list to get to the lightest blue, those are implicit or more intangible things. And the to truly get to real systems change, you need to kind of check all 6 of these boxes. That's not an easy thing to do. But let's walk through these quickly because this will set the stage for the brainstorm that we're going to be doing in a little bit. So on the structural change side, so you'll see that fully half, 3 of them, are more in this tangible or explicit category. So that's policies. Those are government rules, regulations, priorities that guide the systems and others' actions. Practices are about organizational and practitioner activities that reflect the values and priorities of the system. Resource flows is how money, people, knowledge, information are allocated and distributed within the system. So those are kind of all fairly definable. The next category down is relational change. So this is more where you get into relationships or interconnections between the different pieces. So that fourth one is relationships and connections. So the quality of the connections and then the communication occurring between the systems players is huge. If you don't have good communication, it's likely a problem. Power dynamics are also important. Which people and or organizations hold decision-making power, authority, influence, and which don't, and how does that impact the system? And then lastly, this is the one that is entirely implicit, are the mental models. So these are the things that we all show up with, the deeply held beliefs and assumptions that influence one's actions, not only your own actions or assumptions about things, but also assumptions about how others maybe think or respond to things. So that's systems change. And systems range, like we talked about, from simple to very, very complex. History and interrelationships are key. And as I started thinking through this more in preparation for today, I came up with a little analogy that I hope you'll bear with me. It's about zippers. So if the system isn't working, maybe it's a simple fix. Maybe the zipper is just stuck. And if you can jiggle it a little and get the parts of that relationship working again, it'll be fine. Maybe it's a little bit more complicated. Maybe the zipper is just broken and needs to be replaced. So more energy, more time, more funding, but not a fatal flaw. But maybe it's much more involved. And maybe the pieces that we're trying to zip together aren't the right pieces. Maybe we need to be adding, removing, reconfiguring, and then installing new zippers to create an entirely new system. And then maybe zippers aren't the right thing at all. Maybe we don't need the zippers. Maybe we need to be thinking about a different solution to get us ultimately to the system change that we want to see. So with all of that context, let's get into it. So the work group priority topics. So this is the topic that we want to dive into more today. We had a really fun little exercise at the Together Bay Area conference last month where urban forestry got the most marble votes, followed by greenways and GSI. But what really we care about today is this column on the right and what you all identified 3 months ago in our first conversation, what are the 5 topics really that for this group floated to the top? And those are greenways, green stormwater infrastructure, urban forestry, maintenance, and governance finance. And so we're going to be tackling these 5, so building on February and working together in a collaborative Google document. And more info to follow on that, but we're going to be looking at important subtopics, right? Because each of these is still like a pretty broad umbrella topic. So we want to understand a little bit, are there subtopics, issues here that we need to kind of call out as important? We want to, in each of these 5, make sure that we have on our radar all of the regional coordination that's already happening, right? So that we're not reinventing the wheel. We're dovetailing with what other groups are already doing. And then lastly, looking at systems change in each of these categories. And so the Google document basically has those 3 tables. The first 2 here are quite simple. They're basically just a bullet list. So for each topic, a simple table about subtopics, and then a second one about who's already coordinating regionally. We did pre-populate these tables with some of the groups and some of the topics that we know about. This is by no means the full list, and really we would love you all to vet this list and add comments, etc., so that we're all starting from the same point. And then in terms of the systems change, we're going to be focused on these top 3, these 3 most tangible pieces, the policies, practices, and resource flows for each of those 5 topics. And that will look like this. So it's a little bit more complex table. At the top here, it says topic ABC, and there's an ambition or a goal listed there as sort of like our hypothesis of what the ambition would be. And then again, for each of those 3 topics, the policies, practices, and resource flows, this first column on the left is to identify what elements are creating the problem or what's sort of stopping us from getting to that ambition. And then the strategies that might help us unzip those, those problems and solve those problems.